Oh, hello everyone. My name is Gavin Strange, and I fear that I am the absolute dum-dum on this Zoom chat because I don't have any formal training in anything. I never went to university, and I don't even understand what anyone's talking about at all. So I'm coming at this from a very visual, creative idea generation point of view, but hopefully that is just as valid as anything else. So yeah, my name is Gavin Strange. I go by the name of Jamfactory on the internet, and it's been my alter ego for many a year. I live and work right here in beautiful Bristol and have done for the last 17 years. And so I mentioned at the top that, yeah, I'm a director and a designer for Aardman, a creative studio that has been around in Bristol for the last 40 plus years. And it really is an absolute dream place to work. It really is. It's a place that just really thrives on the people, and it thrives on collaboration. It thrives on sort of getting the best out of people. I've been there for 13 years now, and I joined as a senior interactive designer. But basically, through the sort of 10 years, I didn't shy away from showing and sharing everything else that I was interested in. I kind of didn't like the restriction of just being labeled with what it said on my business card or what it says on my email, sort of in the footer. I really believe that we're all so much more than just what a title says or what an Excel spreadsheet lists us as. Just talking with James at the top of this before people joined, we were talking more about music than we were about any other structures, because it just shows that people have always got these interests. And so I basically made it a really sort of big point of mine to not shy away from sharing the other things that I was up to try and sort of maneuver how people saw me and what they thought that I could do. And basically that kind of thing is a very slow burn. There's never going to be sort of instant results. You've really got to try and shift people's way of thinking. But how I would do it is I would just continue to sort of, every time I would make something in my own time, and for me it was moving towards wanting to be a director. I was a designer, but I wanted to be a director and a filmmaker, and I was doing it all in my own time. But the scale of the project can only get you so far when it's just you working on within your own skill sets, or with a small group of mates who are sort of helping out or whatever it may be. And I just basically continue to show and share that and just put it under people's noses. And thankfully for me, they would listen, and they would give me a bit of time, and they would give me their feedback, and they would give me notes, and they would give me eventually support. They would sort of give me equipment. And basically I just sort of created this dream role within a company I absolutely adore by just sort of not being afraid to put myself out there, basically, and to show and to share. I jumped ahead. But what you're seeing on screen at the minute, that's my latest show reel, and I know I do all sorts of directing work from 3D to 2D, motion graphics, stop frame animation, mixes of all of them together. And I just sort of love this excitement of trying to be as varied as possible. But for me, the sort of way that I've plotted it, it's all because of the work that I believe I've done in my own time. Like I say, I didn't go to university. I got straight into the design industry when I was 17, and I got a job as a very rubbish junior designer at a design agency in Leicester, where I was born. And I was so rubbish. I really was. Well, I think about this a lot. I was neither truly terrible that people felt concerned for me, nor was I good. I was so middle and mediocre. And what that means is I never really expected anything of myself, and no one expected anything of me either. And back then, when I was that young, I just coasted along and thought, well, no one else, expects anything of me. And so this is just me, just mediocrity. And I felt very happy with that. I was just very casual. But it wasn't until I got my first job, and it was actually my boss who encouraged me really as to learn. He needed me to learn faster than I was learning on the job, and he encouraged me to, and for me it was doing digital design. He encouraged me to set up a website to use as my online portfolio to do things in my own time, and to learn and to grow. And so I ended up buying a domain name called jam-factory.com. purely randomly, and I started using that as a digital home, and basically that has been my digital home for the last 20 years. I celebrated 20 years of registering Jamfactory last weekend. And why I believe in it sort of so strongly is that I've essentially done the same thing for the last 20 years, from being a God knows how old I was there. I've got hair that's long gone, so I don't know how long ago this was. This was being, you know, being with you know, borrowing a mate's garage, and sort of just, I wanted to, no one was asking me to make skateboards, but I really wanted to do them, so I just sort of started doing it myself and seeing how I could make things. And I really wanted to get into character design, and so over the years I got into that more, and then ended up making friends and sort of collaborating with people, and to just trying to make things happen, until fast forward, this is something that I made to celebrate 20 years of Jamfactory just last weekend. And I think I feel really strongly about it, because it really has sort of carved out that path for me in my career. If I hadn't have sort of conjured up the energy and made the time in my Jamfactory time, in my wee hours and whatever time I can get, I would have not got the dream job that I have. I would have stayed sort of as the designer, which I was still very happy with, but, you know, sort of deep down, I wanted more, and I still do want more. And for me, I believe the only way to do that is to really try and sort of better myself in every single way I can. And there's a huge caveat here saying that it's not as simple as just, oh, just go and do passion projects. Like, time and energy is so difficult to come by. It really is. But you just have to make it work, because at the end of the day, what else are your options? You know, it's that you've just got to carve it out. And for me, my routine has changed over the years. I now have 2 young children, and so my passion project time is very different than it was 20 years ago, you know. And but for me, that means it's focused. So at the minute, I get up at 5 a.m. and I do 5 to 7 a.m. and I don't get lost on Instagram, and I don't get lost on Twitter. I just kind of stay focused. And of course, it's you know, what is easy for me working on a computer may be very different to what, you know, the facilities and the things that you need as engineers. Of course it's different, but I do believe that the sort of the ethos and the mindset applies to all of it. It's about trying to, I guess, take a bet on yourself, and to sort of, you know, just to lead with confidence, and to think, no, I'm going to try it, I'm going to do it, because nothing is wasted by learning and trying something new. Even if it's an absolute nightmare, you will have learned something more about yourself. So I'm a real big fan of just, you know, using whatever time and energy you can muster to really invest in yourself, and to sort of to put things out there and to see what can happen. And there's a few things that I just would want to share, a few headlines which I think really help. I think one of them is that it's better to beg for forgiveness rather than to ask for permission. I think there's 1,000,001 people, there's 1,000,001 people out there in the world that are doing what you are doing, who have the same skill set as you, that may be getting those opportunities. So you can't wait for those opportunities to pass you by. You've got to get out there, you've got to grab them, you've got to be vocal, you've got to see where you can place yourself in the world. And it might seem that I'm presenting to you with stupid neon colors and I can't stop talking, and not everyone's as extroverted as me, but hopefully you shouldn't feel like you have to be an extrovert to be noticed. There are so many different ways for you to carve out a space for yourself to be noticed. You just have to do a bit of work and dig to see what would work best for you. How would you most feel comfortable shouting about yourself when you don't actually have to necessarily shout? You know, it can be making those quiet connections, it can be attending things, it can be listening, it can be connecting with an individual. You know, it can be so many different things, because you shouldn't wait to be asked. You should do the thing because no one asked you to do it. You know, the stuff that makes your heart sing, the stuff that makes you excited, the stuff that just is a silly idea niggling in your head, or the belief that you can do something better because what you've seen out there isn't good enough. You know, there must be so many opportunities to do things. And, you know, there's always amazing stories out in the world of people who took a shot, took a chance. And I know it's super easy for you look at it and you go, yeah, but that's them, that's not me. But it has to be someone. It has to be someone. Why shouldn't it be you? You know, you've got to try and do all these things, because I kind of feel like you've sort of you've almost got to find your voice. You've got to find sort of actually what makes you you. And I'm only learning this about myself now. I do think this is a lifelong journey. I think this is a lifelong quest sort of thing, really. And actually it's kind of, and you only discover this by doing things more and more and more, and learning how you operate, how you work best, how you work with people, how you get the best out of yourself, how you get the best out of other people, and then kind of finding, you know, we all know what our voice sounds like. Sort of like, but what is your sort of, you know, what is the voice inside you that gives you those ideas, or sort of pushes you to go forward? Sort of being comfortable and confident in who you are, you know, will really pay dividends as to where you want to place yourself and go forwards. And I think sometimes, don't worry about biting off more than you can chew. Take the path of least resistance. You know, pick the low-hanging fruit. Get the easy win. Honestly, it can be so overwhelming to try and think, okay, I am going to do something, and it's going to be huge, and it's going to be massive, and I'm going to change the world. It doesn't have to be. You can just change what pencil you use, and that might then spark something else. And it you know, it's those tiny changes in maybe your routine, or maybe your desires, or whatever it is. You know, it can be a really little thing, but if it means something to you, then do it. It doesn't have to be gigantic. And don't wait until you have all the tools, until you have all the perfect things. It's so easy just to think, oh, you know, for me, sometimes with music, it's like, oh, I can't really do that because I don't have that synthesizer, or I don't have that nice piece of machinery. Well, that's always going to be the way. There's always going to be something better that you want. There's always going to be a toy. There's always going to be something that you don't yet have access to. But if you sit and wait there, if you sit and wait for the tools, and you sit and wait for someone to ask, you might be waiting your entire life, so you might as well get cracking. There's this amazing pianist called Andrew Garrido, who actually learned to be a pianist before he had a piano. He would memorize where the keys should be, and he would play along with pieces of paper. And now he's a world-class pianist. Absolutely, absolutely incredible. And don't make it perfect, make it now. Just don't wait, you know, don't wait, make do, iterate, learn, grow, destroy it, rebuild it again. I mean, look, someone decided to build a baby delivery service. It's not working quite right, but they did it anyway. Good on them. You know, make a product, iterate it, get it out there, learn, grow, and sort of see where you're going to go with things. And just own the chaos when things get absolutely bonkers. I think that's the excitement, that's the thrill of, you know, when you're just spinning too many plates and it's sort of, oh my days, you know, try where you can to take the positives from that and sort of feel the energy and use the energy to go forwards. You know, it's not sustainable, but in the moment, you know, if you're in it, and then you're in it because you're working on something that you really enjoy, then kind of own it. There's this amazing quote by the director of an incredible video game called God of War, which I think is a masterpiece, and it feels flawless. Yet hearing him say, we were trying to take an inaugural flight on the plane whilst we were building the plane, whilst also drawing the blueprints of the plane as it was taking off. I love that. You would never, I don't sort of see that when I play the finished thing, when I experience the finished products on the PlayStation, but kind of knowing those trials and tribulations that this huge team went through, of just everything was a nightmare all the time, and it was absolutely chaotic, you know, kind of gives me hope that if people of that level are feeling that, and kind of, you know, that's a part of their process, then hey, maybe it's all okay for us. And the thing that I just wanted to end on in this lightning quick talk is to just remember that even the smallest of spoons can make the biggest of waves. And that's me. Oh, you're on mute, James.
I am. That's so always the case. I'm so sorry. That was amazing. Thank you so much. That was brilliant. We're going to jump straight to Charlotte, just because we're really short on time, but there's a question come through, so we'll do questions at the end, if that's okay. Charlotte, over to you.
All right. Is it okay if I share my screen?
Yeah. Yes, please.
Nice one. Cool. So hopefully you can see that okay?
Not yet, but it can take a moment.
Okay. Oh, there we go.
Boom. Yep. Looks great.
Okay, perfect. Right. So thanks, James, for introducing it. And also thank you to Gavin for your really inspiring talk. So firstly, I must admit that this title is a tiny bit misleading. Floating wind is not the UK's sole way to get to net zero carbon emissions. And it is one of many technologies that should be used to get to this net zero nirvana. Nevertheless, I've really enjoyed learning about floating wind during my placement at Everoze, and I thought it would make the perfect topic to talk about. So the wind farm on this slide is the Hywind Scotland wind farm, which is the world's first commercial floating offshore wind farm. It has been producing since 2017, and this demonstrates that floating wind technology can produce reliable, clean energy. Over this talk, I hope to cover a bit about how you can make a wind turbine float, the advantages of this technology, and a bit about the current progress of the UK in achieving net zero, and also the challenges to floating wind that happen at present. So what isn't seen often is the substructure of an offshore wind turbine. An important distinction to make is between fixed and floating offshore wind foundations. Fixed foundations, such as monopile and jacket foundations, are attached by drilling or piling into the seabed. They have a continuous rigid structure from the waterline to the seabed, which ensures that the wind turbine remains above the waterline. However, floating foundations, such as tension leg platforms, spar buoys, and semi-submersible foundations, are attached to the seabed using anchors and rely on buoyancy to ensure that the turbine remains above the waterline. So there are three main things which you need to create a floating wind turbine. You need buoyancy, stability, and a mooring system. Buoyancy is needed to keep the wind turbine afloat. Stability is needed to ensure that the wind turbine doesn't topple over, and a mooring system is needed to ensure that it doesn't float off. And with that in mind, I'm going to try and attempt to explain briefly how these foundation designs on this slide work. So Hywind Scotland uses a spar buoy filled with water and iron ore, or rock, to ensure that the stability of the wind turbine is maintained via a low centre of gravity. It uses what is called a ballasted quaternary mooring system, where the turbine is fixed to the seabed using the weight of the mooring lines, which have a length greater than the depth of water, and ballast is then fixed to the centre of these mooring lines to provide extra stability. The semi-submersible foundations in images 2 and 3 maintain stability using ballast water tanks within the foundations, which act as ballast, and this increases the waterplane moment of inertia, leading to stability. These are currently being installed using quaternary mooring systems, like with the spar buoy foundations. However, they do not have additional ballast attached to the mooring lines. The barge foundation in image 4 maintain stability using the waterplane moment of inertia. These are currently being installed using quaternary mooring systems, like with the semi-submersible foundations. The tension leg platform, shown in images 5, and the tension leg spar buoy in image 6 uses the buoyancy of the foundation to create tension in the mooring lines, and that's what provides the stability. So I guess there is another question which some of you may have, and this is why these floating wind turbines are necessary. Why can't we just keep creating fixed offshore wind farms? The first of the two reasons I will give is that the UK is running out of areas which are feasible from both an engineering and non-engineering perspective for fixed offshore wind development. From the left-hand map, it may look like there is a vast amount of seabed which can be used for fixed bottom wind. However, these designs do not take into account the areas which are suitable from a non-engineering perspective. There are many non-engineering reasons why not all of the seabed can be used. So firstly, a site may be near to known wildlife populations or too close to human populations on shore. The site may be placed on a known shipping lane or be in an area which is a known migratory path for birds. And all of these reasons will mean that a wind farm cannot even apply for consent in these areas. The invention of floating offshore technology opens up areas of the seabed which are unsuitable for fixed bottom wind, as shown in the right-hand map. This is fantastic, as wind farms further offshore are less likely to interfere with human activity and also are less likely to interfere with bird populations which nest on the shore. So the second reason that floating wind turbines are necessary is that they help to keep installation emissions down. For offshore wind farms, manufacturing and installation accounts for around 70% of the carbon emissions of a wind farm. On the left-hand side, you can see a common method for installing fixed wind turbines. A jack-up installation vessel is loaded up with turbine parts at a staging port and then has to motor to the wind farm. Once there, the vessel jacks up by placing its legs into the seabed and effectively hoisting itself out of the water. And this provides the stability needed for assembling the wind turbine. Currently, renting these vessels is expensive and requires them to be booked months in advance, as there is a global shortage of vessels like these. Floating wind turbines, however, can be fully assembled at the staging port and then towed using tugboat to the wind farm, at which point they are attached to the pre-installed mooring and transmission lines. And this greatly simplifies the installation process and leads to lower emissions and costs. These tug vessels are also more widely available and can be hired at cheaper rates than jack-up vessels at most ports. So where are we now in the journey to net zero? Renewable electricity accounted for a record 7.1% of electricity generated in the UK during 2019. And to achieve a net reduction in carbon emissions, electricity generation sources need to have a carbon payback period, which is significantly shorter than the intended lifetime of the wind farm. For offshore wind, the intended lifetime is around 20 to 30 years, and harmonised estimates for the carbon payback of the offshore wind farms estimate around 5 months to 1 year for it to offset this carbon. So it takes less than 5% of the wind turbine's life for the carbon emissions displaced by wind power to equal the life cycle carbon footprint of the wind farm. So we're getting there, basically. And what is now needed is to accelerate the development of renewable technologies. However, there are some challenges that the floating wind and renewables industry is currently facing. And whilst I have painted a very positive picture of floating wind farms as a solution to the problems of fixed bottom wind, these challenges still remain. I'm sure some of you may be familiar with this photograph on the left, which was by Bloomberg in Wyoming, which shows sections of wind turbine blades being buried at a landfill site. Whilst around 95% of the components of an offshore wind turbine can be resold and recycled, turbine blades, which are typically made of composite materials, are a challenge to repurpose. However, there are various companies and research groups which aim to recycle or repurpose these blades in various ways, such as turning them into pellets and fiberboards to be used for walls and flooring, or recycling them through cement co-processing. Another challenge for the floating wind industry is currently the cost of producing energy using floating wind is very high. The chart on the left shows the levelized cost of electricity, which is a measure of the lifetime costs divided by energy production. From the dark blue line on the chart on the right, you can see that the levelized cost of electricity for floating offshore wind is around 180 euros per megawatt hour, or around 150 pounds per megawatt hour. And that is really, really expensive, considering that the levelized cost of electricity for fixed bottom offshore wind is currently around 60 pounds per megawatt hour. And alongside challenges for the floating offshore wind industry, there is a major challenge, among many others, for the renewables industry as a whole. That is that grid balancing is becoming more expensive. Grid balancing is the term used to describe the task which the national grid has of ensuring that the correct amount of electricity is connected to the grid. This is an essential service that must be developed if renewable energy is going to be a reliable source of power. And so to end, I'm going to leave you with a slide which I think does something to explain the scale of wind turbines today. The largest turbine in the world is currently the GE Halide X, which has a 28-meter hub height, a 260-meter hub height, a 220-meter diameter rotor, and a maximum generating capacity of around 14 megawatts. And this is equivalent to the turbine on the far right-hand side of this image, which is roughly the height of the Shard in London. Thank you all for listening.
Oh, amazing. Thank you so much, Charlotte. Wow. What a great talk. And that last wind turbine is massive.
Yeah.
That is huge.
Yeah.
Like crazy big. Anyway, right. Brittany, over to you for part 3, and then we'll jump into the Q&A. And we've got some good questions coming through, so keep posting them.
Cool. Yeah, I've just shut the curtains again because it's getting crazy, crazy bright. Great. Well, thanks for joining us today, guys, that have been able to. James, I take it you can see my screen.
Yep. Bingo. Yeah.
Cool.
And
Okay,
I recognize a lot of those faces too.
Yeah, I bet you do. So I'm going to give you a bit of a chat around some of the challenges and opportunities of setting up a company, and most importantly, a company that is looking to tackle some of the sustainable development goals as set out by the United Nations. So to give you a bit of background around myself, I'm a civil engineer. I've been in the industry for about 10 years. I obviously studied at the University of Bristol, graduated in 2015, I think. After graduating, I went to go and work with Engineers Without Borders in Peru, which is that middle picture on the bottom. I then went to join Bureau Happold Engineering, and while I was with them, really tying back into what Gavin was talking about earlier, was that I sort of wanted to shape the job around me a little bit, maybe was a little bit stubborn. And one of the things that Bureau Happold had as part of their sort of support network was a thing called SOS, which is Share Our Skills. Although I felt while I was working, I'd sort of worked in the NGO space for a while, and I didn't think that the NGO model was right for me. I didn't feel like it was scalable, or it wasn't able to have the scale of impact that I wanted to have. I did also want to continue sort of working in the international development space. So we applied for some funding from Bureau Happold, and we went to work with a community in Kenya. So this is a Maasai group that live on the border of Tanzania, and we were doing a water access project for them. So I did a lot sort of in international development around sanitation and water. But as I was saying, I didn't feel like it had the sort of scale of impact that I wanted. So after a couple of years working at Bureau Happold, I decided to try something different, and I co-founded a company called QualisFlow. So when we started QualisFlow, our main mission was just to try and make construction more sustainable, and we sort of had to follow that journey a little bit before fully defining how we were going to do that. But we decided that a profit for purpose model was the one that we wanted to take, and I'll tell you a bit about that. So I want to leave you guys with sort of 3 key things to think about as you sort of go through your journeys, whether that's going into a career in a big organization, or whether you're going to start your own thing, or whatever you do, or if you're going to go work for an NGO. The 3 things that I think are really, really important to hold on to is understanding the problem and the opportunity. What is it that you're trying to solve, and what's the opportunity in solving it? Understanding the growth potential. This is a bit of a funny one, because I think sometimes not everything has to grow and scale drastically, and sometimes nice organic growth is a better thing. And one of the biggest challenges we face today is our overconsumption, and that was rather driven by our need to grow and scale rapidly. So it's got to be growth in the right way. And then the final one is staying true to your purpose and mission. And I do think that's the most important one, because if you lose yourself along the way, which you almost certainly will, it's really important to be able to drag yourself back to where you started. So starting with understanding the problem and opportunity. If you're not sure what problem you want to solve, I would suggest starting with these 17. The United Nations went out back in it was sort of between 2013 to 2015, as the Millennial Development Goals were coming to an end, to try and understand, okay, what do we need to hit next? And these are the 17 target areas they found. So every single one of these is a huge problem space and a massive opportunity, and you can dig into them online. But where Jade and I ended up tackling was sustainable cities and responsible consumption, so 11 and 12, and both of those tie very, very heavily into Goal 13, climate action. The irony being that Jade and I actually met tackling goal 6. So we both went to tackle clean water and sanitation, and it still has a very, very big part in our lives and in our hearts. And I think the next company we start will probably be in that goal. But because we're both from construction, we decided that 11, 12 and 13 were going to be our starting points. And this is why. So the problem and the opportunity for us looks like this. So construction consumes over 380 million tonnes of resource a year, and 13% of those materials that go onto a construction site go direct to waste without being used in any sensible way. And that's because we over-order, we order the wrong things get delivered, they get damaged, all kinds of things happen along that way, which just results in huge, huge amounts of unnecessary waste. And the sort of overwhelming impact of that is that the built environment, of which construction is a huge part, contributes to 40% of global emissions. So this is a massive problem to solve, and this is what we wanted to take on. So for us, we had to really dig in to understand why that was such a problem, how these outcomes were actually being realised, and why our industry was so bad, when it is also such an amazing industry. And we realised that the industry was really being asked to deliver on quite a lot of things at once, and it was finding that quite hard. So construction has really struggled with productivity. McKinsey quotes it as one of the only industries in the world that has seen a net decrease in productivity in the last 20 years, which is pretty embarrassing. We have a massive problem with errors and waste, as you've seen from the stats above, but also the industry in the world as a whole is trying to push for greater profitability and sustainability. So how do we achieve that if we're being unproductive and we're generating loads of waste? So we started to unpick that on site and really get down into the detail of the problem. And we realized that it really sits in these 3 areas. So the way that we try and manage resources on construction sites, so physical resources like material and waste, is incredibly resource intensive. We still track it all by bits of paper. And this blows my mind because, you know, on Amazon, you can just log in, you can set your order, it'll arrive within a couple of days, you'll have everything logged digitally, like you don't need any paper, it's absolutely bonkers. Construction, that doesn't happen. Everything is tracked by paper still. And there's a very, very slow and gentle move towards e-procurement systems where they're trying to be more digital. But because we have thousands upon thousands of different suppliers in this industry, all at different stages of digitization, the change is far too slow for us to achieve the outcomes that we need to achieve. Because we're tracking everything by paper, humans suck at processing data. We are not designed for it. We input errors manually, we lose bits of information, we're very, very slow. Really, we need to get machines to do this, and that's what they're built for. So our current workflow is very vulnerable to data loss and errors. And the overwhelming impact of that is that it's highly fragmented and it's just not valuable. So what we've seen on site is that 60% of data goes missing or is input wrong, and therefore the teams aren't using it to inform their strategy. And so they're spending a huge amount of time and money trying to capture data that ultimately is valueless to them. So this is what we set out to tackle. And the reason this is important, and I should have put this in the slides, is you can't manage what you can't measure. The industry cannot manage its waste and materials at the moment because it currently cannot measure them. So this is what we did. Jade and I are both from the construction industry. We're not tech people, but we went out to try and find a tech solution that could fix these pain points. So the first thing we had to do was automate the data capture. We do that with photographs. We then had to automate the digitization of that data. We do that with machine learning. We then had to audit that information. So we do that with basic statistics and mathematics and referencing databases. And then finally, we wanted to analyze that information to make it valuable to the engineering teams in real time so that they could use that to eliminate their waste, to reduce their carbon, to improve their productivity. So I'm just going to flash this up so you get an idea of the tech, but basically on site, they take a photograph, some machine learning extracts the ticket. So we use optical character recognition and natural language processing to extract and structure that information. That then goes into a lovely database that is fully referenced and fully audited. And we send them notifications to alert them to any errors that might be in those tickets. So if they've got the wrong material on site, instead of just sending it straight to waste because it sits there for 3 months and then gets damaged, they can actually act and say, hang on, this isn't the right stuff for this project, let's send that back, or let's apply this somewhere else. And they can actually start proactively thinking about how they manage materials and waste. And then finally, looking at how we use that to look at the overall project and start informing things like commercial management, supply chain performance, and sustainability. So that's what we've done so far. And we've started to achieve those outcomes in terms of saving people time, reducing project risk and waste, but also increasing the value of that data. And that's the problem that we chose to solve. And it was one that we understood and that we spent a lot of time understanding. But for you guys, it might be something completely different. So that's the importance of understanding the problem and the opportunity. So next up, we're going to have a quick look at understanding the growth potential. There are loads of different ways you can grow. And there's no one right way. It's not always one way at all. It is entirely dependent on what it is you're trying to achieve. So I've worked for NGOs. That's a very organic way of growing. And the challenge that they face is obviously feeding money back into the cycle to maintain that growth. It relies on a lot of external input as opposed to being sort of self-generative. Then you have social enterprise models. And this is something that we explored extensively as to whether we could do a social enterprise. But we actually ended up going for a profit with a purpose company. We're not B Corp registered, although we might well do that as we get bigger. B Corps are profit for purpose companies. But what we set out to do was say, right, we're going to build something that's profit making. And the reason being is that we needed to attract a lot of external investment because there's a lot of capital that goes into building these technologies. And then we needed to scale that up and start feeding that back into the company and making sure that we were really delivering the impact. So there's no sort of simple answer when you think about growth, but it is something to always bear in mind. And I'm looking at this from a company perspective, but this also goes for personal as well. Some people like to grow very organically and take their path very gently. Some people like to accelerate that to a crazy extent and like chase promotions and work for massive companies and like really, really fight for it. That has its own pros and cons as well. So thinking about growth, it's on a personal and a professional level. So finally, the most important one is staying true to your purpose and your mission. So at QFlow, we define this as our purpose is to leave the world in a better place than where we found it. And that started, way before we even founded the company. That's, from before Jade and I even met. But we really came together and realized that we could build this together because we were so strongly united over this one purpose. We then sort of honed that into what is our vision for this company and for the industry. And that is for construction to use only the resources it needs in the most efficient way possible so that it can deliver a built environment that really meets the needs of society today, that helps us access water and roads and travel and connects people, but doesn't compromise future generations, which in many instances is the definition of sustainability. So as a company, we're then on a mission to build a tool that enables the industry to do that. And we see that as being a system that enables us to verify design, to prove that we're doing what all the engineers and the designers and architects asked us to, and that we're actually managing our resources while we're doing that. So I think I'm out of time, but I do have a couple of seconds left to read you this. And if anyone's done the International Development course in the uni, then you may well have seen this before when I've lectured. But this is a story that I just think is so beautiful and so important. So an old man was walking on a beach one morning after a storm. In the distance, he could see someone moving like a dancer. As he came closer, he saw that it was a young woman picking up starfish and gently throwing them into the ocean. "Young lady, what are you throwing these starfish into the ocean for?" "The sun is up and the tide is going out, and if I don't throw them in, they will die," she said. "But young lady, do you not realize that there are millions of miles of beach and thousands of starfish? You cannot possibly make a difference." The young lady listened politely and then bent down, picked up another starfish and threw it into the sea. It made a difference for that one. And I just think I love that story. It's one my sister sent to me and I just absolutely adored it. And it really ties into, what Gavin was saying earlier about waves and teaspoons. It doesn't matter how little it looks like what you're doing is, it makes an impact on the grander scale. So Jade and I started as two overly enthusiastic young female engineers going, we're going to take on construction and make it super sustainable. That is mental in many ways, and it may not have that much impact. These numbers are tiny so far in terms of the amount of carbon and waste that we've eliminated, but we're on the beginning of a journey that will have a bigger impact, and every single person that we talk to, it highlights that to them. And so I think if you guys can be like the women throwing starfish, then I really highly recommend that you do. Thank you all.
Thank you so much. That was amazing. Great. So Gabriel, over to you to handle the Q&A.
Will do. Thank you very much. Yeah, great talks all around. I enjoyed all of them. There's been a few questions coming in, so I'll read them out in the order that they came in. So it starts kind of with Gavin stuff. Someone says, hey Gavin, Eve in fact says, hey Gavin, presentation. Do you ever find yourself in a creative rut? How do you keep creating when you can't find a vision?
That's a great question. Yeah, I'm in creative ruts all the time, and I'm always frustrated, and I'm always in a varying flux of happiness when it comes to creativity. But I think for one, I've just accepted that is the way it is, and that's the way I handle it as well. I get very frustrated with myself, and I get very frustrated with my skills, and I get very you know, I really look up to my peers and what's possible. But I think I just learned to be quite inward looking, actually, and to sort of recognize that, oh, maybe I'm being a bit grumpy. Why is that? Oh, because you know, I'm not happy with what I'm achieving, or I'm not happy with where I'm going. I think I try to be in this quite quick, constant feedback loop with myself, and so I can sort of identify what the problem is and then try and fix it quite quickly. But in terms of sort of getting out of that creative rut, I personally just try and work through it. I guess just being a sort of a commercial creative, I have to. It doesn't matter if I'm not feeling it, you know, someone needs something getting done, and so I have to do it. And there's an awful lot to be said for that, of sort of you've just got to persevere and push. But yeah, it all comes with the emotions, and you've just got to try your best and just keep on pushing, keep on making, keep on doing.
Brilliant, thank you. And we'll take a question for Charlotte here. So somebody asks, Lizzie in fact, with floating wind turbines, is there a chance they'll be damaged by high waves? If so, what can be done to mitigate those risks?
So to be honest, a lot of the mitigation of those risks is in the design stage. Interestingly, in fact, in November of 2020, there was a scale model of a floating wind turbine that was they put it in the sea, and then there was a hurricane that moved through that part of the ocean, and it was knocked over because they didn't take into account that it was a scale model effectively being battered by a hurricane. So yeah, a lot of the mitigation is at the design stage, but there are lots of ways that if a hurricane does hit, or there are high winds or high waves, you can stop the turbine from breaking itself or falling over. And one of those ways is just by stopping the blades and then feathering them so that they encounter the least resistance possible. And then also you can model it and place weights on the mooring lines in a way that ensures stability if there is a storm.
Very, very interesting. Peter asks, I'm guessing this is to Gavin, any tips when designing a portfolio?
Yeah, it's a really good tip, actually. I think it's really important in whatever factor, really, to have a portfolio, to have a place that you can call your own, that sort of represents what you do best. I think any tips is keep it updated regularly, because you never know when you or your work might pop into someone's brain. Just this morning, someone messaged me asking about a stop frame animator, and it was someone that brought up a name I remember, and it was like, oh, okay, yeah, just remember that person, sent the link over, but their site was kind of old and a little bit outdated, and I didn't know if it truly reflected what they could do. And so I think, yeah, keep it updated. Definitely have one. You know, there's all these different platforms in the world to get your work out there. I think use and abuse them in whatever sector that you are in. You know, it's about being found, isn't it? You know, it's about making those connections. So do use them, but that becomes a job in itself. But I think just accept that is a part of it. You know, keep you know, keep sort of waving your hand and keep being out there. And the only way you can do that is by using all these different systems and platforms. But it doesn't have to be all singing and all dancing by any stretch, you know, just whatever you feel is a representation of you and a representation of what you can make. But do use all the platforms out there.
Gavin, is it worth adding to that? It's a bit of a cheesy joke about two guys in the woods, and then they see a bear, and one starts putting on his trainers, and the other one says, "You can't outrun the bear," and he says, "I don't need to. I only need to outrun you." And actually, for engineers, an online portfolio, you know, don't worry about where the bar is across. You know, like if I compared my portfolio to yours, it would look rubbish, because you're a creative and I'm an engineer. But actually, if you compared it to other engineers, you'll find that you may well stand out a long way ahead of other people. So don't look on LinkedIn and go, "Oh my goodness, look at all this amazing stuff everyone else is doing." Think about how you're standing out against actually the people who are kind of going to be looking for engineers doing the sort of things that you're doing, and think about how can I stand out against them.
Yeah, sure. Surely it's about the idea, and it's about the person, the personality, because you may be the world's greatest engineer, but frankly, if you're a dick, then you won't last very long. And honestly, you'd be so surprised at how many people don't know that the skill and the talent is really only a small part of it. It's how you conduct yourself. It's how you work with other people. It's how you talk to them. You know, hearing Brittany talk about, you know, with passion and with honesty and integrity, and hearing what Charlotte's talking about, it's like when you believe in something, people know that and can see it straight away. And they're like, yes, I want a piece of that. I want to, you know, people want to work with excited people in whatever factor. So yeah, as well as it is about what you have done and what you're excited by, you know, it is an awful lot of personal development as well, because you will just reap the benefits from that. So yeah, that's worth saying, I think.
Great. I've got a bit of a broader question from an anonymous attendee here. So it's more about, I guess, knowledge transfer between engineering disciplines and policymakers. And anonymous asks it in the scope of floating wind farms, but I guess it's broader to many of these topics. So how do you find is a good way to communicate the ideas and the important technological decisions between you know, people in the industry and people out of the industry? I guess Brittany might know a bit about that while in a startup and trying to attract funding.
Yeah, it's funny. We're actually fundraising at the moment, and one of the biggest challenges is explaining what is actually going on in our industry at the moment to people who are outside of it. So we're trying to get investment from both a construction and prop tech investor and an impact investor, because we want to have that sort of sustainability message in our investor group. And yeah, the first thing is they don't believe that construction still runs on paper, and they don't believe that this can honestly be a pain point. And then all you have to do is introduce them to someone in the industry and they'll go, "Oh my God, yes." So that kind of helps. But I think we also have that trouble when talking to clients and helping them to understand that technology isn't necessarily something that is going to introduce new pain. And that's often perceived, particularly on construction sites where there's a lot going on and they've had some tech thrown at them that hasn't really been suitable for those sorts of environments. And I know Gavin will know a lot about this, but the user interface and the user experience of technology is so critical, and it's not really talked about in traditional engineering environments, I don't think, or certainly not in civil engineering particularly. But the user experience between the tech and the person is so critical. And one of the things that we have to work a lot through is actually explaining to them, yes, this tech is going to introduce something different, but it's not going to be something painful, and it is going to be something that's going to deliver a lot of benefit and value. And the way that we do that currently is in part in having those conversations and showing them the tech, but it's also letting them play with it. And so we quite often give people a pilot, and we'll say, look, if you don't believe us, if you don't believe how easy this is going to be to deploy it for 3 months and see what happens. And then after that, they're like, yes, okay, we can't live without this. And that is amazing. And it's an amazing experience for yourself, but also it's amazing to see the sort of realization from an industry that is very technophobic to suddenly say, okay, no, I get that this tech is actually going to help us deliver not only our outcomes better, but it's also going to make my team happier because they're not having to spend hours manually typing stuff up. So I think really when you're talking to the decision makers, although it might not be policymakers, it's about helping them understand the individual pain point that it eliminates for them personally, but also for their team, and also being sensitive to the fact that tech is scary for some people, and it is often down to the user interface or the user experience with that technology.
Wow, amazing answer there.
Can I throw in a thought as well, Gabriel? Sure. Is that okay? Sorry. I would just say, as activists, you should really be bringing engineers to account. Engineers have known about the problems of the climate emergency for at least 15 years, definitely, I would say some much longer, and have done very little. You know, concrete still produces 8% of the global CO2 emissions. Well, why is no one shouting about this? You know, 40% of the emissions is down to engineering, that, you know, and construction and all of that stuff. Why is no one shouting about this? Why are activists not calling engineers to account in the same way as they're calling financial institutions and governments and other organizations to account? How have we managed to stay so anonymous that no one has made us, do you know what I mean? Like, we've just hidden away and just carried on doing it. What the heck is happening?
That is changing. And I would say, like, within the last sort of 6 to 12 months, we've seen a dramatic shift on that front. So you might well have seen the Constructors Declare movement, where a lot of the tier 1 contractors, architects, engineering consultants have come out and said, you know, we acknowledge there's a climate emergency and we acknowledge our role in that. And they're now releasing all these net zero roadmaps. 2 years ago, when we founded QFlow, that would have been completely unheard of. And one of our biggest barriers when we were fundraising the first time was that the investors were like, construction doesn't care how bad it is. Why the hell are they going to pay you? And we were like, they do. People do care, and it is coming. And now it's here, and we're like, nah, I told you so. So that's very gratifying as well. But I agree. There are challenges with things like concrete and steel, and I think one of the big issues for the industry there is that, in part, it's that legislation piece. They don't know the impacts of switching material types in some instances, and they're so risk averse. We are so risk averse as an industry that if there's any sense that it might not do what we think it will, then they'll go, well, I'm not going to touch it, I'll do the old thing. And again, it comes around to that try it and see. And so I know Thames Tide, we're using sem-free concrete for some of their temporary works, because then they get to see how it behaves. And there's a lot more of that, but in a way, I think we also have to be slightly patient. We need to push, and we need to tell them, you need to keep doing this, but we also need to be sensitive to the fact that it is a big emotional shift as much as it is a physical shift for the industry.
Yeah, it's all very interesting stuff. Yeah, great points all round. I think this will have to be the last question for Charlotte, and it's, what form of energy storage is the most viable in the UK to help with grid balancing? I've heard a lot about hydrogen recently, so I want to hear about this as well.
So to be honest, at the moment, it's battery storage. There's so many battery storage plants around the UK at the moment. They might be standalone battery storage plants, or those which are connected to solar PV. And those can perform all sorts of services: fast frequency response, dynamic containment, things like that. But there are also other sources of grid balancing. So a really cool thing which the company I've worked at has done recently, and I am allowed to talk about this, is they have they've designed what is called a dynamic balancing service using people's homes. So they're taking a bunch of assets, so looking at electric cars, looking at fridges, looking at air conditioners, heating, all sorts of things, and trying to understand how you can get each of these assets to effectively talk to each other and talk to the grid to ensure that this demand and supply is equal, which I think is pretty cool, to be honest.
Yeah, there's a lot of like cash flowing around nowadays in companies that can do grid balancing, because I think I've heard a few people go into the industry. It sounds like a big topic. Anyway, thank you to all our panelists. I think we'll have to probably end it there as the next session begins. I'll hand over to James maybe to wrap up. Yeah, well, just guys, thank you so much. I really loved that. The next session is starting as soon as I close this Zoom. I can open the next one. I have put a link, so if you haven't signed up but you'd still like to come along, I've put a link in the chat which you can open. I would copy it now, because once I've closed this it will be gone. But yeah, thank you everyone, and love the conversation, love the chat.
looking forward to seeing you hopefully at the next one. And then, yeah, let's just keep this conversation going. It'd be great to see engineers trying to make a really big positive difference in the world as they leave and go out into the world and do amazing things. Thank you, everybody.
Cheers all.
Thanks,
Bye.
James. Bye.
Right, cheers, guys.
Thank you.